Welcome to Old Path and our study through the book of Revelation. We are in the second chapter currently. We are going to be looking at the second of the seven churches that's kind of in the chronological order as it's laid out here, being the church at Smyrna. Interestingly enough, for one that is pretty intriguing by the things that are said, it also is only this one and Philadelphia are churches to which Jesus doesn't say, "This I have against you," or "I've noticed this, it's a problem that's happening in the church." Some of them have some deeply rooted systemic problems. This is not one of them. Interestingly enough, though, there is enough that is said in these short verses, just four of them, that really begs an awful lot of questions. And there's no way that we can possibly answer those, so there's no way to even attempt it. What I do find is going through the churches, you will find that people try to read too much into all of these churches to the point where it's not just maybe trying to understand or ascertain a little bit of what could be potentially historical stuff about the literal place. But man, when it starts to get into it's analogous to this or it's symbolic of that, you get into some really, really bizarre things that are said. And of course, I'm never going to do that. What I want to do is stay to a historical view of these seven churches. This one here, the second of them, Smyrna. And what we can kind of figure out a little bit, there are some things that I think we can take from third-party references that we have from historians. Let's face it, these were Roman cities and really going back to Greek times. In fact, as far as Smyrna is concerned, or Smyrna, this had a history that goes back maybe 1,000 years from what you can get historically understood, maybe 1,000 years before Jesus. Of course, by the time that this is written here, the Romans are really kind of the world power, but from, again, records and things that we can gain from historians, that this place was destroyed and pretty much wiped out long before Rome came around. And then after the death of Alexander the Great under the Greeks, he had four generals that took on the responsibility of what was the Grecian Empire. So it was Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander. In this case, Lysimachus would have been the one who would have seen to the rebuilding of this city and then giving way to the Romans. It is now it's now Smyrna rather, and of course carrying from the Greek name. But still, nonetheless, it's under the control of the Romans now. In the names of the churches, and we'll get into this a little bit, some of them you can pretty much tell what the name of that particular church means. Last week when we looked through Ephesus, it's really not known. There are some things that are posited because it sounds like a couple of different Greek words that it could be, but there's no straight across word that you would say Ephesus means this. It's just the proper name of a particular city, Ephesus. And where the name is derived from is, again, it's speculative. Nobody really can say for absolutely sure. With Smyrna, we have a very good understanding of what it would be. And again, according to historians, you might have a little bit of information that can be given that would help with that. So what I want to do now, I'll put up the map for this seven churches. I'm going to have this up each week. And it'll help us to understand a little bit of the geography of it and the situation of where they are. And I love this because it's kind of written in relief here, and it's helpful to understand that as far as the first three, as we look at them from Ephesus, then going north to Smyrna, and then ultimately up to Pergamos, these are all places that had waterways to them. They would have been considered along the coast, and you can do things as far as getting to them and trade routes and all the rest. But you'll notice that they all start to go from the north to the south in an eastern direction. And if you're able to look at a different map, you'll notice that there's waterways to all of them. And so there's water sources, and typical if you're living in that part of the world, and if you're living, I should say, at those times, you have to be close to water sources and you have to be close to trade routes. There's a reason why cities were built and rebuilt, and when they were destroyed, they would be rebuilt again in the same locations. We have that when we go and visit in Israel. It's just common. You expect that to be the case because there's a reason why people situate them the way that they are. Natural resources is right at the top of that list. So as far as Smyrna is concerned, before we look at the text, let's just do some observational things that I think are really helpful to us. One of the things I didn't really get a chance to mention last week, and I probably should, when it comes to the churches, there is the things that Jesus has to say in the description to that church, of reminding them of basically the things that are said of him in the first chapter. So when we looked last week at to the church at Ephesus, write these things. This says, he who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and who walks in the midst of the golden lampstands. The accusation to this church was that they had abandoned their first love. And in any Christian's life, our first love is really the one who has saved us, the one that we serve, the one that we're dependent upon, in this case, of course, Jesus. So any one of us could be able to look and say, we love the Father who has given us his Son. We love the Holy Spirit who is the one who guides us and leads us. We love God, but we love Jesus because of what he had accomplished for us on our behalf in shedding his blood for our sin. So it's an important thing that we understand. Leaving their first love, Ephesus could be accused of, have you left the love of the Father, of the Holy Spirit, of the Son? You could say all of the above if you want to, because it was just, again, they had become mechanical. If you didn't get a chance to listen to last week's, you can go back into the YouTube channel or on the website, and it's there for you to either view, or you can listen to the audio on the website. So anyhow, with all of that being said, in this case, what we find, since there's nothing that he's going to say to Smyrna that he has a problem with them, you're going to find that he also has something that he does want to say to them. So these common things that are said to the church, it's where he says, thus says, and then he gives a description of himself. And in this case with Smyrna, it's going to be the one who was, and the beginning and the end, and the one who was dead but is alive. And it fits nicely because of what's taking place in that particular church and the things that are going on there. And so these are people who are facing martyrdom and oppression in such a way that it could very well lead to their demise. Many of them, doesn't give us any kind of a number, but the persecution is unlike any of the other churches by a long shot. What's being said of them, they're in a very, very precarious place, even to the point where it could be to their death. And again, an untold number. We don't know how big the church was, how many people this could have potentially affected. But there are some very major things, and it helps us to understand why Jesus says to them the things that he does. And we're going to look at those details as we get actually into the text. But he says this, I know your works, and he says that to all the churches. And of course, the knowing of the works being common, it's also, there's a message to the overcomer in the churches, and then also let anybody who has an ear hear what the Spirit says to the churches. You're going to find that those 4 topics, if you will, or 4 sayings, are worked into each of the addresses of the church, and some of them have other commonalities, but this one applies to all. So just kind of interesting. So again, as far as Smyrna is concerned, the name of the church, as we might think of it, is really dealing with, again, when you look at it, you can think myrrh. And as far as myrrh is concerned, myrrh was something that you only find mentioned a couple of times. One was at his crucifixion, and then ultimately when he was then buried. But it was also brought to him by the Magi at his birth. So those are the 2 places that you find myrrh mentioned, which, according again to the historians, Smyrna would have been known for this kind of it's a sap, but it crystallizes. It becomes kind of hard, that we call myrrh. It has a great perfume to it, but it's also got a bitter taste if it's something that you have on your mouth or on your tongue. So yeah, it's bitter, and yet the more that it's crushed, the more the perfume comes from it, because again, it's kind of a resin that comes from a tree. And according to historians and what we can gather from that, this was one of the trades that they were known for, whether it was something that grew local or it was something that they used there in their trade. Again, they're in a port city. So this kind of stuff would be coming around, and this was known by that name, Smyrna, the word myrrh being right in it. So it seems like it works just fine, especially as far as a persecuted church is concerned, and that even in the midst of just very, very distressing conditions, and even what we know is martyrdom and the people who would die in the case of not in the offensive sense, but when the church is persecuted, their dependence upon God and His love for them, it's something that is recognized as being sweet. It's an aroma as far as that's concerned, because it is for a time. And he says a very interesting thing when it comes to the persecution that they're facing, and I want to save that for when we get there. I don't want to go too far with it. But the name of this, it would make sense, a church that is being crushed, and yet you'll notice the things that the Lord has to say to them, that it's not something that He's looking to punish them, but they're going to be going through some very difficult things. So the obvious question that it would kind of raise to each of us is, how would we handle that kind of adversity? It's a good question. And so that's part of the application part of it. So you're going to see that God tells them that there is a trouble that is coming to them, and they're not going to be excluded from it. It's only that there is going to be a reward to them. And so I just want to point this out before we get there again, just kind of as an observation. There are those who will point to a particular view of eschatology, and when will or how much of the church, or how much of this that we're going to read about in the book of Revelation, does the church have to endure before they're raptured? So this goes to the timing of the rapture. And so there are those who hold, as I do, to the pre-tribulation will be taken before it. And then there are those, and this is probably the most vocal of the opposition in all of the church right now to that view I have, and it's known as pre-wrath. And they're pretty firm in their belief. Let's use that. And one of the things that you'll see is they'll say, well, why would we think that somehow we're supposed to escape when there are people that are being persecuted for their faith all over the world, and why is it that we should think that we would escape that? It's one of the common objections to the pre-tribulational view. And I would want to point them to this church here at Smyrna. So here is a church that's under enormous persecution. And yet there are 6 other churches that Jesus talks to that are having nowhere near this kind of a problem, and it's all at the same time. So what I read in the book of Revelation is that when these things begin to happen, they're universal throughout the entirety of the earth. And the idea that we break down about what's man's wrath versus God's wrath, once again, you go back to the first of the introductions to this book, and as far as that's concerned, persecution is something that has happened throughout the ages to all kinds of people, and there are people that will live their entire life and never see any kind of persecution, while others have to endure horrible persecution. And so if Jesus is the one who is opening the seals, that would be a universal, God's beginning to mete out His judgment. There's no reason why we should look at it and say, well, this is wrath that's because of man, and that's wrath that's because of God. In this case, you're going to see that it's wrath that is against the church here at Smyrna at the hands of some people, but the person behind it is the devil himself, and he's the one who stirs them up. So, again, people are going to disagree on that one, and sometimes not so agreeably so. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time going through it. If it comes up in the text, we'll talk a little bit about it, but it's just not something that I think deserves a whole lot of discussion, because it never really goes anywhere. So, if this is viewed, a couple of other things I want to just deal with before we look into this. There are some who would believe that this was written before the fall of Jerusalem, and so sometime pre-70 AD, and they'll look at things like this church, and they'll see that when this persecution is supposed to come to them, that it's going to happen in pretty short order, and then all the things that are mentioned in the book of Revelation after this had to have taken place shortly thereafter, and they'll point to the Romans sacking the city. Now, they'll have to do so much symbolism in their study of this book, and they'll ultimately kind of get to the point where, well, these are not really literal cities, they're just used as figurative of other churches, but they're really speaking more to the situations that are about to take place shortly thereafter, and they're pointing to Jerusalem. Again, because what happened in Jerusalem wouldn't affect these 7 churches hardly at all, if any, and it wouldn't have happened during their time while it was going on in Jerusalem. It wouldn't be happening elsewhere in the world. So there's just so much of that falls apart. But if we look at these things that are said to the churches at that particular time, the original recipients, God intending us to know about these things all through history until his return, there are things that all churches can glean from these reports to these other churches. Notice that's how each of them ends. Hear what the Spirit says to the churches, plural. And so these could read one another's letters potentially, but I think that's more intended for down through the generations, including ours. What would God want to tell to our modern day churches as he has through the generations? What would we be able to look at the systemic problems that were happening in the church, or whatever he might be addressing to the churches, and say, we want to learn the good and the bad. If there are things, Ephesus, there are so many good things that they are doing there. We ought to emulate those things, but we want to make sure we never leave our first love voluntarily. We don't want to get stuck in that situation. With Smyrna, what would we learn from Smyrna? You may very well face persecution, but endure it no matter what, because God would not have you to go through it without his notice. And though you may have to go through it, it's but for a time, but your reward is eternal. That's what you take away in the application as far as Smyrna is concerned. So again, these are churches that are written, they're first in line, but they may fit very well going historically. So again, it's just important that we know these things as far as that's concerned, and be paying attention to how do we apply what it is that we learn from each one of them. So God always knows what the outcome is. Let's just remember that too as we study through these. The recipients, they may not know. They may know little bits and pieces, but until it's all said and done, it comes to a completion, everybody, and I mean everybody, is learning along the way. Only God knows the outcome. And here with Smyrna, he tells them he's noticed who they are, he knows what they're about to go through, and he promises them something at the end of it. So we want to be able to remember that at all times and the importance of it. So let's take a look at our text. And let's have a word of prayer, and we'll dive right in. Father, we thank you as we come to your word and have this time where we can spend together. We would ask that you would help us in our understanding, and that we would rightly learn and rightly divide your word, and handling it with accuracy, as Paul says. And so not reading too much into it, taking what we can know, and making proper application. So we give to you all thanks, and we ask that you would help us in our understanding. We give to you all praise and honor in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so there are some really fascinating things that are said as far as this church is concerned. Once again, I've already said it's only 4 verses. So it starts at verse 8, and it says this: Now to the angel of the church at Smyrna write these things, says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, your tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say that they are Jews, but they are not, but they are the synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. There's a lot that is there. Again, the name of the church is Smyrna, and so taken from what we would understand as myrrh. And if it's a persecuted church, the idea that it's being crushed, and yet as far as God sees it, they are precious to him. And of course, it makes people wonder, well, then why not intervene? Well, there's nothing that gives us any idea as to whether or not, and there's nothing in Scripture, let's say it this way. There's nothing in Scripture that promises any of us some kind of an easy, simple life just because we're his children or any other reason. We live in a fallen creation, and ever since its inception, the church has been roundly hated by the world. And why would that be? Well, they're hated by the world because we are precious to God. Now, Some churches have to go through it, other ones don't. Again, as you've seen that map, these are all very close to one another. And there are a couple of things that are kind of takeaways as far as I'm concerned. One of them I mentioned last week. If they're all basically, they'd all been founded roughly at about the same time, and I believe that you can make the case that these are heavily influenced by the work of Paul in that part of the world. And so whatever was happening in Ephesus would have been making it out to the other churches, because people are moving from place to place or going from city to city like we do. And so the idea of Paul going to those places and teaching as he did, and the people that would be going out from there, once again, Colossae is not one of the 7 churches, but it's right in the area around Laodicea. So the idea that the things that Paul was doing, that they would have made it around to that whole area, I think goes without saying. So if these churches all were in operation around the same time, founded somewhere around the same time as it advanced out from Paul's time, how is it then, ask yourself the question, how is it then, if they're in the same general area, founded about the same time, how is it that one church seems to have it all together going very, very well? Another church is doing very well spiritually, but they're being incredibly persecuted. A couple of the churches are into absolute, straightforward, insane amounts of apostasy and just ready to be judged. Other ones that are kind of in complacency and more in a transition. And if you remember in the first of these, I had mentioned that with Ephesus, I kind of see these in about 3 categories. I think there are 3 categories that work really well. You have churches that are doing great, this one and Philadelphia, as far as anything that Jesus might say in a way of critique. You have other ones that are kind of more in the way of transition, and I think Ephesus is starting down that road. Because you can be doing everything well mechanically, but if you have abandoned your first love, you're going to be operating under your own power for a while. You'll become complacent and lethargic like Laodicea. And so Laodicea is another one. And by that time, we're taking care of 4 of the churches. When you get into Thyatira and Pergamos and of course, Sardis, you're talking about some churches with some very, very deep-seated problems. And we'll see as we get to them. So these are churches that are into stages of apostasy. So how do you go from Philadelphia and here Smyrna, churches that seem to be doing everything as they're supposed to spiritually, to a place that's just involved in some of the most insane things that a church could ever be accused of, Pergamos, and it's happening also again in Sardis and to some extent in Thyatira. You get there by complacency, taking your eye off of the ball, being self-sufficient. We've done it this way forever. There's no dependency upon the Holy Spirit the way that it should be. That's where it starts to get complacent. And again, you can look around our landscape in this world today, and you can find churches that are following these models. Ones that are very self-sufficient. They got it all figured out. Everything looks like it's going great operationally. It's marketed very well. It's run like a great business. May not be teaching things that are necessarily apostate or heretical, but they're on their way there because, again, the things that would keep them in check, being faithful to God's word and dependent upon Him, is something that's starting to lack a bit. Well, that's going to get you into those other places. So this is one of those, as far as Smyrna is concerned. They're in that place where they're supposed to be, though they are facing enormous difficulty. So, verse 1, once again, as we go through this, to the angel, that would be the messenger. And I believe that the messengers here are literal, physical leaders of that particular church. Now, history tells us that one of the disciples of John, the writer of this, a man named Polycarp, was killed, and he was the leader of this particular church here at Smyrna, but he wasn't killed till probably some 70 plus years after John wrote this. So there's nothing that would tell us that Polycarp was necessarily the leader of this particular place, but someone, a person, it makes the most sense, because I don't believe that there's an angel that is over this church, because they're going to be having to deal with the consequences. These angels, these messengers to the church, sometimes are being singled out for the things that are happening in their church or what's under their supervision. and angels can't make a church do something. But a leader of a church can really influence the direction of a particular church. And if the church needs correction, it's going to need to have its leadership corrected first. So again, when it says angel, just think messenger. The same word is used of humans as well, and it seems to fit best with the context. So to the angel of the church at Smyrna, write these things. Jesus telling John, write these things, and this is addressed to the leader, and the leader's supposed to tell this to the church as well. So how do we know that? Well, obviously the messenger's the messenger. They're a messenger who belongs to the Lord. He's the one who is saying, here's what I want said. Paul would be the same way. I'm telling you these things, Timothy, and Timothy, I expect you to find other men that will serve with you, that will know these things as well. So it's not to be kept to themselves. And again, remember, this is said, make this known to the churches, plural, though it's an individual church. So he says, now these things says the first and the last, and he who was dead and has come to life. Now you'll find those in the first chapter. These are titles about Jesus, but the first and the last is the protos and the eschatos. So in the Greek words, I love these words. The protos is the prototype, the first of a kind. It's the one that you've got an idea that if we're creating something, we've got an idea. And so we're going to make something that is the first of its kind. In this case, Jesus comes to them saying, I'm the first, I'm the prototype, if you will. Now, that would give the impression that he's part of the creation, so we don't want to go too far with it. But the Greek would say he's the first of an order, if you will. So, of course, he being the head of the church, and he also being the one who has always been, before time was, he was. And, of course, that he's also the one who's in control of all things as creator and carrying them along now as we see them. So the protos, he's the beginning, and then the end, the eschatos. So he will also be the one who is, if we look at it just in the simple terms, there's never a time where he hasn't existed, and he always will be. If that's what we want to think about the beginning and the end, that's great. But also in our timeline as humans, we know that everything changed when he began the creation. Everything changed when he became flesh and dwelt among us. And we know that at the end, he will be the one who will usher back in the kingdom of God. And ultimately, he will be living amongst his creation in a forever kingdom when it is once again timeless. And we're, kind of taken away from this linear place we call earth and these temporal bodies that we have. So just really interesting ways of describing himself. And of course, he says he's also the one who was dead, but who has been brought back to life. So we know that that's, again, who was, who is, and who is to come is mentioned in the first chapter. And it's just that idea that he, again, as a prototype, he's the first one who was ever to see physical death, to resurrect, never to die a second time. That again makes him the only of a kind. He's the first, he's the proto of that. And there's never been one like him. So that's just such the imagery here is just so magnificent, and it's so wonderful. Now, this would be the perfect, I guess you could say, self-description of him, of who he is, Jesus speaking to this church, because he's about to tell them, you are incredibly persecuted, and it's only going to get worse, to the point where some of you will be put to death for this. And so if you're hearing that, isn't it comforting, if you're the person reading this, to say, yeah, but Jesus is the first and the last. He's the one who himself had died, and yet he lives. So for a church that's being told that, isn't it comforting to know that even if you die, you're still going to be, you're still belonging to the one who lives forever, because he's also been put to death, but he exists. And so that promise, even in the midst of such horrible things leading potentially to their death, they have this promise of eternal life. So absolutely fitting. So he says this. Now, looking at them only, and again, if you compare this to all of the other things that he says to the other churches, where he starts to talk about, these are the things that I observe. So when he says here that I know your works, that knowledge that is used here is used in every one of the church, and it's eido is the Greek word, and it means, it's not that I've heard about it secondhand. It's not that I've read about it in a book. I haven't come to it as a knowledge where I do believe that it's the case, but I've heard it from some other source. Here is where Jesus says, I've observed it as an eyewitness. So he stands as an eyewitness to all of these churches when he says, I know, and then in this case, your works. That's the thing that's produced. I see everything that could be known about this church, the things that make you who you are, as I look at everything that's produced, your works, the things that you do, I see it all. Now, as an observer, he's able to make an accounting of it. So he says, I see your works, and I also see your tribulation. And the tribulation here is the common word thlipsis, and you'll see it all throughout. Now, when Jesus talks about great tribulation, that's thlipsis. And when I say, I'm saying it without being overly expressive. It's Thili. So it's thlipsis, thlipsis. What is being said there, and it's a common word for trouble, tribulation, struggle, difficulties. Sometimes it's used of just the day-to-day of troubles that would be happening to a church, as opposed to something like the tribulation, because it has an article in front of it because it's talking about a particular event that will be taking place. The book of Revelation is speaking about the tribulation, and of course it has a midway point. There's some really interesting things that happen midway through the 7 years. It's broken into two parts, and there is big debate as to whether it's all tribulation or if it's tribulation and great tribulation. You'll find people arguing on the internet about that all the time. We'll deal with it when we get to it. But for right now, the tribulation that he's speaking about is what's happening right there in their midst. He's not talking about the Great Tribulation. And this is one of those places where even the people in the pre-wrath place say, when it comes to tribulation, why should we escape? And they'll usually point to John 16:33. In this world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. Well, remember how that chapter started. There's going to be people that will put you to death thinking that they're doing God a service, verse 4. So, yeah, there's going to be difficulty for the here and now, and he's writing that to the apostles. And their life was about to go into some incredible turmoil, and they and the believers in Jesus were going to have to endure some pretty awful stuff in that first century, and he's talking to them specifically. And then down through the ages, it works very well, but it's talking about temporarily, here and now, the troubles that you're going through and the difficulties. So he doesn't mention very many of them by specifics, but he sees these things. I see what you have produced as a church. I see the fruit of what your ministry is there as the church at Smyrna. And I see the difficulties that you have to go to, the tribulation, the troubles that are put upon you by someone else. I see those things. Now he's going to turn his attention and his focus to who those people are. So we get that where he says that, actually there's a couple of other things really quick, I'm sorry. So he says, I see your works and I see your tribulation, and I also see your poverty. And the thing with poverty, this is a word that's used only 3 times for poverty here, the way that it's presented here. And it's not just, we're just making ends meet. We've got a few things here and a few things there, but we don't have excess. We're kind of just getting by. This is a poverty, and it's meant in the literal sense, that whatever it is that's inflicted upon the church has created this. They're in dire straits. They're in difficult times, and they're left to the place of almost beggary. They're on the streets looking for help. It's not that they just don't have excess, they are just barren. So really kind of a sick thing if you consider it. It just shows how locked in the persecution of them was relative to the other churches, because Smyrna was prosperous. And think about this, a port city in the Roman world, right across the Aegean Sea from Greece, and right in a trade route. There's no reason why anybody should be in that kind of a condition. But the reason why they're in that condition is because of who they are. And that's why Jesus addresses them this way. I see these things. I've observed what's going on with you. I see the tribulation that you go through. I see what you're doing, and I see the fruit of your ministry. I even see the depths of your poverty. And he says, though you are rich. Now, it's not a contradiction, because one is speaking to material things, And that in that case, they're in a place of incredible poverty, which is an interesting thing too, because of a doctrine that makes its way around our churches today, that if you're a child of the king, and then you should be able to live in a place of prosperity, speak wealth, and speak prosperity into your life. Take a look at Smyrna. There's nothing that they were doing that was wrong. If Jesus said, I have this against you, you lack faith, he would have said that to them, and that would have been the reason for their poverty. That's what you hear from some of the snake oil salesmen, word faith people. In this case, this is a church that Jesus has no critique of, and yet they're in a place of extreme poverty. And he doesn't tell them, exercise your force of faith and speak it into existence. That whole dog and pony show that you see on the television is nowhere near reality, because here's a church that's doing it as they're supposed to. There's not even a critique that Jesus has, and they are in abject poverty, and it's a horrible, difficult time. So here's a church that just argues against the nonsense that we see on television all the time. But he says you have this poverty, but you are still rich. So rich spiritually, no question about it. And how that affects them, that richness that they have spiritually, even in the midst of that trouble, they can have a right mindset. They can still have joy in that. And it won't affect them as it might affect other people, having just abject poverty, yet you're still rich. And so all of that would be because of their spiritual relationship with the Lord and everything that influences thereafter. So he says, and I also know this, and this is where he turns his attention to the people who are the reason for their oppression. And we'll get a little bit into that. Again, we're going to have to depend, at this point, we would have to depend on some third-party historians to kind of fill in some of the blanks on this. There are some big picture things that we can know about this. There are some other little nuanced things that we really genuinely cannot know, but we can kind of piece some things together a little bit by it. But there is a blasphemy that's being spoken of here. I know the blasphemy of those who say that they are Jews, but they are not. They are the synagogue of Satan. Now, depending on who you're listening to, some would say this is allegory. And this synagogue is not a literal synagogue. It's rather used in a metaphoric sense for whoever it is that's oppressing them and all the rest of it. Well, the idea that there were Jews who would be in that city is not a problem. You expect that. Look at the first couple of verses in Acts chapter 17, and it says that Paul, as was his custom, would go into the synagogues in any city that he went to. So what that tells us is that Paul was used to encountering Jews in every place that he went to. Read the books that he was writing to the various churches, and you'll find that he's having to deal with Judaizers all the time. So people who know what he's teaching, but there was a very heavy Jewish imprint in that part of the world. So the idea that there could be a literal functioning synagogue there in Smyrna, not a difficult thing. Why would there not be? We know that there was, as far as Paul was concerned. Who were some of the most vocal critics of anything that Paul was doing but the Judaizers? And before I go any further, let me make sure I'm really careful, because there is so much hatred of the Jews in our world today, especially because of what's happening right now. We're in June of 2024, and we know what's happening in Gaza right there. When I say Jews, I'm talking about the ones who were in opposition. Because remembering, Jesus himself was a Jewish man of the tribe of Judah, and the people who believed in him were Jewish people as well. That was his audience, was the nation of Israel. It was to the tribes of Israel. So his followers that we know of, the ones that are recorded for us in the scripture, were Jewish. It wasn't until they went to the Gentiles long thereafter that it started to go beyond that. So please never mistake me for one of those people who is critical of Jews as though they're all the problem. Clearly that's not the case. So, but the idea that there could be hostility that would be leveled against a church by the Jewish people in the synagogues who are not of they may be genetically tied to Abraham, but they are certainly not people of faith as Abraham was. And I'm going to go through and we're going to read quite a bit from John's Gospel in the 8th chapter that kind of goes to the heart of what's being spoken here. So this blasphemy that's being spoken of, we think of blasphemy as a person who's cursing God. And that certainly fits. But blasphemy just means that you're speaking slanderously about someone and really with the intent of injury to that person. So whoever these people are claiming to be Jews are saying things that are blasphemous. And so it almost gives the impression that these are people standing a ways away that are just saying offensive things towards God, or maybe saying offensive things towards them. And both could be absolutely true, but let's remember that the blasphemous things that they're saying is having some kind of an effect, because they're about to be thrown in prison, and it's costing them in a material sense, because they're in a place of just, gut-wrenching kind of poverty because of what's being said. So what fits best, if we take a literal view of this, somehow the Jewish people there, the people in this synagogue that's being spoken of, have a great deal of influence because they are able to bring about incredible persecution against this church. Some will see a physical death as a result of it, and they have to live in a place of constant poverty, crushing poverty. Again, that's if we're just taking the text at face value and not reading something into it. That's all that we can deduce from this. If we don't start saying allegory, metaphor, symbols, blah blah blah, there's nothing in this that gives the impression that it's anything other than literal. Because if again, it has to be something that's standard. It has to be consistent. All 7 churches must either be literal or must be symbolic. And if they're symbolic, what are they symbols of? And we'll get to in Philadelphia, if they're just symbolic about something, well, this church is told that they're going to be kept from what's coming. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Let me just suffice to say, here's where I sit on this. I have no reason to believe that they are anything other than 7 literal churches being written to at the close of the 1st century, and Jesus is saying this to them with the intent of them being the first recipients and having this circulated among the churches. Here's the good things, here's the bad, let the churches pay attention. Saying the same to us. Through the generations, from this 1st century to our modern times, survey what was going in all of these churches, and if there is a place that needs some attention, pay attention to the failures, pay attention to the successes, and in that you will find a church that can stay on an even keel with God. Do the things that are pleasing to Him, don't do those things that He has a problem with, and you'll find yourself in fellowship with Him, not needing correction. So hopefully that makes sense. So now he says, these are people who say that they are Jews, but they are not. They are actually of the synagogue of Satan. So they are not Jews in the Jewish sense, because remember, the Jews, as we would think about it, should have embraced their Messiah, and many of them did. Let's look at the ones who did not, and it'll help us to understand, I think, a little bit better who we're talking about here. Now, I know I'm going to be reading quite a bit here. Hopefully that won't be a problem. We're going to jump right in the middle of it. And by all means, feel free to read all of chapter 8, but there's just a lot that's here. And this will, if I could set the table, makes it a little bit easier to understand. If we try to think of the people that would be problematic to the church in Smyrna, would they be the same kinds that the church experienced in Jerusalem after the resurrection of Jesus in the early church times? So think chapters 3, 4, 5 of the book of Acts, and how they were constantly being brought to the leadership, the Sanhedrin, threatened and beaten, and then ultimately with Stephen in chapter 7 of Acts put to death as a martyr of the church because they were unwavering in their fidelity to Jesus. And so it created among them a hatred from the Jewish people who didn't want to hear anything of it, who sat as opposition. But again, remembering the followers of Jesus, the early church, Jewish people. So there was a division among the Jews. The Jews who embraced Jesus, embraced him as Messiah, knowing he was coming. And then he met all of the criteria. He was able to do everything that Messiah would be able to do, and they believed in him. There were those who, even with all of that information, would never bow a knee to him. Those are the people that are spoken of. That same mentality still exists at the close of the 1st century in Smyrna. This is the only way that I see, if we're going to take a literal view, this works perfectly. But here's the mentality. So again, what makes them Jewish? They're able to say, well, we're direct descendants of Abraham. Okay, great. Jesus doesn't disavow that. Look at what he says. Let's jump in at verse 34. Jesus answered them and said, most assuredly, I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave to that sin. And a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. So again, this is the whole debate. Well, Jesus says, I am the Son. The Father has sent me. You don't know him because you don't know me, and you don't know me because you don't know him. Basically, you're just in name only. You wear the robes, you live in the right place, you've got the right family genealogy, but you're out to lunch as to the time around you. You should know that I am the one that God has sent by the things that I say and do, and I meet all of the qualifications. This is his debate with the religious leadership. So he says this, and this is after he's already made this statement. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. So the whole topic is one of slavery. And if you'll agree and accept who I am, I'll set you free from your bondage. In this case, sin. You'll be set free from it. So he says this, I know that you are Abraham's descendants, but you seek to kill me. Why? Because my word has no place in you. I speak what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have seen from your father. They answered and they said to him, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham, which was what? Faith. He trusted in God. It was accounted to him as righteousness. Chapter 15 of Genesis. So the idea that as he sees it here, Abraham absolutely embraced the promise that God had given him, and recognizing that down the road, this person, Jesus, who he couldn't have known at the time, he knew for sure that God would create that because God made a forever promise through him. The first of them, the things that were promised, is chapter 12 of Genesis, when God says he's going to make nations out of him, and that all the nations of mankind for generations will be blessed because of him. And he says that to him before he ever lays eyes on the land. He makes that promise in Ur of the Chaldees. So modern day down by the Persian Gulf, where he was a son of an idolater. The promises of the descendants that will come from him, ultimately the tribes of Judah, that promise isn't made until chapters 15 and then ultimately consummated in chapter 17. And then, of course, Isaac comes around, and that's really the son of the promise. So with all that said, verse 39, if you had been Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. You would believe as he did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God, and Abraham did not, from God. Abraham did not do this. Abraham was just not a murderer. You guys are. Verse 41, you do the deeds of your father. And they said to him, we were not born of fornication. We have one father. That's a shot at Jesus because, you're not even legitimate, because they look at Joseph, not even understanding his supernatural birth. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and I came from God, nor have I come of myself, but he who sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? And it's a rhetorical question. He's going to answer it. Because you are not able to listen to my word. You are of your father the devil. Boy, that's straight up forward, isn't it? You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks it from his own resources, for he is a liar and he is the father of it. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Which of you convicts me of a sin? And if I tell you the truth, why do you not believe me? He who is of God hears God's words. Therefore, you do not hear, because you are not of God. I mean, this is accountability. He's not looking to argue. He's not looking to inflame them. He's making them completely accountable. That's why he's doing this. Then the Jews answered, and they said to him, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and that you have a demon? And Jesus says, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father who you dishonor by dishonoring me, is his point. And I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Most assuredly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death. This flips them out. Then the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets, and you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets who are also dead? Who do you make yourself out to be? And Jesus says, if I honored myself, my honor is nothing. It is the Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God. Now this is, again, he's given them plenty of proofs. So he obviously honors because he doesn't contradict anything that's been written. And God is actually showing himself that he attests to Jesus because of all the things that he's able to do. And the miraculous things are a testimony. Yet, he says in verse 55, and we're getting to the end of this, yet you have not known him, but I have known him. And if I say that I do not know him, then I will be a liar just like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it, and he was glad. And the Jews said to him, you are not 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you that before Abraham was, I am. That's what was said. That means I am the self-existent. I am the becoming one. That is the title that God gave himself when Moses asked him at the burning bush in Exodus, who should I say sent me? And God's reply to him was, tell them that I am sent you, the becoming one. So that, that self-existent, I don't need anyone. I am self-existent. I am becoming. So Jesus uses the same term. And so if ever you hear people say, well, they don't believe that Jesus ever said that he was God. Well, he said so right here, and if you don't believe that, look at verse 59. So they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself, and he went out of the temple. Going through the midst of them, he passed by. So if we want to know what a synagogue of Satan would look like, there it is. We have precedent for it in John, and he records the incident that took place there at the temple. And so, of course, these are the same kind of people that they're there in Smyrna. The message that the church at Smyrna would have is the same one that Jesus had, that man is enslaved to sin, but there is one who breaks the bondage of sin, and that is Jesus by his shed blood. The people who would stand in opposition to that, who should embrace it, you don't expect a pagan to embrace it necessarily, but all of Judaism should have embraced this Jesus the Messiah because he fit every qualification necessary. And anyone who came onto the landscape today, 2024, there is not a single person who could claim to be the Messiah who could prove it. So anybody who would show up, I'm sorry, but you have no record of that. You can't prove that. In this case, Jesus could. It was a simple thing for him to be able to prove everything, whether it was the place of his birth, the tribe to which he belonged, all of those things works perfectly. There's no gaps in any of it. But here, as with Smyrna, so it was in the first century, there were the Jews who should have been looking to him as Messiah, but for their reasons that they would, whatever they would give, they were not the sons of Abraham in the sense of faith, only by genealogy. That would be the same kind of people that would be present at Smyrna, who, because of the same hatred that they had for Jesus in the beginning of it, so those same people would have that same kind of hatred. And because of that, the same kind of persecution at Smyrna is what you saw that created the atmosphere for Stephen being killed, and then the church scattering in chapter 8 of the book of Acts, Paul chasing them all the way to Damascus in chapter 9 as he meets Jesus for the first time. So just remember, this is history repeating itself at the close of the first century, some 60 years post resurrection. All right, so back to the book of Revelation. Hopefully that's not too far of a sidetrack. So he says, after all of that, do not fear of those things which you are about to suffer. Now, we don't get any kind of details here. This fear is where we get the word phobia. Don't be in a place of having a phobia about this. Don't be fearful, with this, like you can do something to avoid it. These things are going to take place. Now, we don't know what they were. There are some details that are given here that have led to a lot of conjecture. So let's just read verse 10. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, and that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Now, the idea that they'd be thrown into prison by the devil, I think we want to make sure we understand that it's the devil who is behind the persecution that's there. God's allowing it for a time. Once again, why God allows some churches to have to deal with this and other ones he doesn't, we don't know. What we do know is on the application side of it, it's as though if anybody is really suffering here and now, we can say it's not as though it's without precedent. But we do know this: it's not about whatever temporary comfort or discomfort we have. Our objective is to make sure that we're right before him as we look with an eye towards eternity and not towards circumstance. Now, again, I am blessed out of my mind every time, especially when I think about it, that God has let me live in a place and in a time when I have not seen anywhere near this kind of persecution. I'm grateful for that, but I don't have that as a promise. None of us do. So here, these people are about to go through something. So what he has to say about it, notice he gives them some specifics. Some of you guys are going to be put into prison, literally. And some of you, it will lead to your death, literally. There's no reason to think that this is symbolic of any kind. So, but he knows that it's some of you, it's not all. And though that is not in the original, where you'll see yours is in italics, it's that it's a group of them. But it doesn't say universally for the church. It doesn't give that impression that the entire church would be wiped out, because it wasn't. So, because again, Polycarp was still the pastor of it, 70 plus years after John writes this. And I am of the opinion that whatever this was happened in pretty short order thereafter. Now, let's get to a little bit more of the detail before I jump into that. So these are things you're about to suffer. We don't know exactly what they are, but it will ultimately lead to the devil stirring up the people, that some would be put into prison, that they may be tested. And again, this is temptation, this is testing, and all the rest of it. But let's remember, this is not Jesus basically saying, I'm going to cause a bunch of calamity to come upon you so that you can be tested and we'll see if you're going to fail. That's not it at all. This is instead, you're living in a place that's hostile towards you, and some of you are going to have to deal with horrible persecution, and it will really get you to the point where you're going to question whether or not all of this is really worth it. That's the testing, the tempting. It's not as though God says, I really want to pour out my love on you, but you're going to have to prove yourself. It's not that. That is the complete misunderstanding of what's being said here. The things that you'll have to go through are going to be so incredibly extreme that some of you may very well just go, is it really all worth it? Do I endure this? What's in it for me? Why should I do this? And believe it or not, I've watched this over the years. People who have suffered with all kinds of things, from losses of a family member to any variety of other things, circumstances in life got them to the point where it's like, well, why isn't God giving me all kinds of things? Why is it becoming difficult for me to exist? And they basically abandon him at that point, because it's just I'm having to suffer for him, and he should owe me something. I shouldn't have to go through all this. We have no promise of that. And this is case study. Church at Smyrna is a great example of that truth. So he says, some of you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Now, this whole 10 days has become, again, all kinds of speculation. And there's nothing in here that gives the impression, though days can be used as an era of time, but most of the time it's used in the literal sense. If it says 10 days or 12 days or 2 days or 1 day, it means that 24-hour cycle. Could it mean that it's for an era of time? It can mean that. But it's pretty specific where it says 10 days. If he's trying to say it's just going to be some indefinite amount of time, it would make more sense that it would be said you're going to be tempted for days, for a day, meaning like day of the Lord is a 7-year process. So there's ways to phrase it, but the specifics of 10 days, some people think that it has to do with 10 different persecutions that happened during church history. Others said that it was 10 years of a persecution that was prolonged, or that there was something that we don't know the details of it. And whatever it took to adjudicate whatever was taking place for whatever it was, lasted for 10 days. And at the end of it, a sentence was passed on some that led to their death. So that would be a literal reading of it. that we don't have specifics on, but I don't care what view you take of that, you don't have specifics in any of it, so there's no sense in trying to make something fit. Let's just let the word speak as it does. We don't know the details of it. They certainly did and would, but we can look back and say, but in the application sense, in the absence of any absolutes, we can say that even in a time of tribulation, it isn't something that means we are saved or unsaved. We keep our eyes focused on Jesus, and whatever happens, happens. He's not punishing us. We're just dealing with a fallen world, and a fallen world is doing to us what a fallen world will do to believers. So he says, you will have to endure this tribulation for 10 days, but here's what I'm asking you to do. Be faithful even unto death. And the faithful is pistis, which is that I'm going to not look in any other direction. I'm going to continue on the path that God has put me on. I will not be deviating one way or the other, even if it comes to the point of death. And then notice what he follows that up with. Because if you're a person that says, well, wait a minute, I'm asked to follow Jesus who loves me and gave himself for me, and yet this could be in my death. Look at how he finishes that statement. If you do this, then I will give to you the crown of life. And so this crown is the Stephanos, which is what we would see in that wreath that went around the head. It was always given to the person that was participating in some kind of a race or some kind of a game of something of some sort. And trying to think of which one of the Olympics it was that was in Athens, like within the last 20 years or so. But that last Olympics that was in Athens, one of the things that they got was the little wreath that went around the head. That would be a Stephanos. And it would be given to the victor, to the overcomer. Interestingly enough, what's been said here in the next verse. So these people here, you may have to go through something that no one would ever want to have to endure. But do so anyways, even if it means your death, because what you will end up getting eventually is a crown of life, and that's something that's given as a reward to the person who is victorious. And it's the life that is everlasting. It's a crown. It's the embellishment around the head. It is the reward to the person, and it's a reward of everlasting life. Beautiful imagery here. So he says, as he finishes this out, so he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Literal, and of course, plural. So is that the churches as in all seven? Are they supposed to circulate these out and let everybody see what it is? Sure. Does that mean even to our day, 2,000 years later, should we be circulating and understanding what was being said to these churches? Absolutely. In fact, I don't know why a church would not teach the seven churches to their church and say, what can we learn from Ephesus? What can we learn from Smyrna or Pergamos or Sardis or Thyatira, Philadelphia, Laodicea? What can we learn from those churches? The good, the bad, jettison the bad, embrace the good, and make sure you have a balance of all of those things and keeping your eyes focused on Jesus no matter what. Don't let things that are external have anything to do with what's going on here and now. You just keep your eyes focused on him. External things and the temporary of life is not supposed to affect the eternal. It's a very, very simple understanding. So the final part of that, and he says, he who overcomes, again, this is the person that's going to get the crown, will not be hurt by the second death. And the second death is what you find at the close of chapter 20 of this book of Revelation. And it's when the books are open and the people who are not found written in the Lamb's book of life are thrown into the lake of fire. It is their second death. They died seeing a physical death ever since forever, and they will stand before God approved or disapproved. Now, again, if they're being resurrected at chapter 20 and they're not part of the church and they're not the people that are present, but they're resurrected from the dead at that time, these were not people who were believers. It will be shown to them that their names are not written in the book of life, and they will suffer a second death. So they died at some point back in history. They are resurrected to stand judgment, and at the end of judgment, they are put down, and they will spend an eternity separated from him. That's the second death. So once again, the promise is you will live forever. You'll have the prize of the overcomer, even if it means your physical death, but you will be preserved, and you will never see death again. So that's the promise, even in the midst of very, very difficult times. Important that we understand that. We don't have any guarantees in this life as to any kind of creature comforts or ease of life, health. None of those things can we demand or speak into existence. They are going to be what they are going to be, and circumstances are never supposed to rob us of these things that we know for sure. Our life here is temporary. No matter how good it is still temporary. The question is, what happens hereafter? Is there for you laid up a crown of righteousness? And there are a lot of other things. This idea, this crown of life. There's the water of life, the tree of life, the book of life, the spirit that leads to life. That the idea of being brought to life. Those are all terms found in the book of Revelation. And so this idea that there is something that leads to or is associated with life. That's the promise to every believer. The day will come when we will be adorned with a crown, and that's to the overcomer, the person who has gone through this life because of Jesus, victorious. This world has not tainted us and consumed us. We've rather given our lives to Jesus, trusted him, and we have eternal life in him. So really, really great, amazing, amazing stuff. If you have any questions about anything that I've shared, then contact me through the ministry's website, and there's an email link there. It is oldpaththeology.net. If you have any questions that you want to ask in the video, you can do so. If you watch us on YouTube, you can jump in on that as well as a platform for asking questions. But again, if you send me an email, I get those and I answer them directly. So we pick up at the 3rd next week, starting at verse 12 and looking at the church at Pergamos. So we'll see you next week.